The child was hiding inside the food crate. Nara Osai found her on a Tuesday, mid-morning, elbow-deep, in a shipment of grain paste that had arrived on the weekly relief shuttle. The crate's seal had been broken from the inside, not pried, not cut, but dissolved along the adhesive seam with something biological, a thin, acidic residue that had eaten through the polymer without touching the food. Nara pulled the lid, and there she was, curled in the cavity between two stacked containers, ashen gray skin dusted with grain powder, enormous silver eyes staring up without blinking. The child did not scream. She did not run. She pressed herself flatter against the crate's interior and went completely still, the way small prey animals did when the shadow of something large fell over them. Nara had worked refugee camps for 11 years across 4 systems. She had unloaded thousands of crates. She had never found a child inside one. "Okay," Nara said quietly, holding both hands open where the child could see them. "Okay, you're all right." The child's ears, long, delicate, pointed like split reeds, pressed flat against her skull. Her breath came in shallow pulls that barely moved her chest. She wore something that might once have been a garment but was now closer to rags. Layered strips of pale fabric wound around her small frame, stained dark at the edges where the grain paste had soaked through. Behind Nara, the morning shift was unloading the rest of the shipment. Voices carried across the camp's supply yard, Dren workers calling numbers, a medical runner arguing with a shuttle pilot about cold chain storage for vaccines, the low diesel rumble of the camp's single functioning generator. Camp Saral, 412 registered refugees, 97 unregistered, and 1 human aid coordinator who had been here for 14 months longer than her rotation allowed, because nobody else volunteered for assignments this far past the contested zone. "I'm going to close this lid partway," Nara said, still keeping her voice low and even. "Not all the way, just enough to block the light so nobody else sees you while I figure out what to do. Is that all right?" The child did not answer, but she did not flinch when Nara eased the lid down, leaving a gap of 4 centimeters, enough air, enough light to see by. Nara straightened up and looked at the supply yard, 14 crates still on the shuttle ramp, 2 Dren unloaders waiting for her manifest check. Morning intake was in 40 minutes and she had 60 meals to prepare. She picked up the crate with the child in it. It was heavier than the others, but not impossibly so. The child weighed almost nothing. She carried it to the kitchen. Camp Saral's kitchen was a prefabricated shelter bolted to the side of the medical unit, open on one end where the serving line ran through a cutout in the wall. It smelled of grain paste, mineral-treated water, and the sharp green scent of the dried kelvar leaf that Nara added to every batch because it contained trace nutrients the refugee population needed and the relief supplies did not provide. She had been requisitioning kelvar through official channels for 8 months. The requests came back denied, so she bought it herself, out of her own pay, from a Dren trader who ran a supply skiff out of the contested zone every other week. She set the crate on the kitchen floor, behind the prep counter where nobody from the serving line could see. "I'm going to open this now," she said. She lifted the lid. The child had not moved. Grain dust clung to her hair, fine, silver-white strands matted close to her scalp. Her skin had the flat, dull quality of prolonged dehydration. Whatever species she was, Nara did not recognize it immediately. Not Dren, the Dren had broad features and copper-toned skin. Not Kaso or Veli or any of the 7 species represented in Saral's registered population. The ears, the eyes, the faint shimmer under the skin that looked like it should be producing light but was not. Cathari, Nara had read about them, a forest canopy species from the Ven Reach, displaced en masse during the Consolidation Wars, bioluminescent skin that glowed when the individual felt safe. The glow faded under sustained distress. This child's skin was not glowing at all. Nara pulled a clean cup from the prep shelf and filled it with water. She set it on the rim of the crate, within the child's reach but not pushed toward her. "Water," she said, "whenever you want it." She turned away and began the morning prep. 60 servings of grain mash, portioned into bowls that she had to wash and reuse 3 times a day because the camp had 51 bowls for 400 people. She worked with her back to the crate, giving the child the thing that cost nothing and meant everything: the absence of being watched. 7 minutes later she heard a small, careful sound, liquid moving in a cup, a swallow, then another. Nara kept her back turned and measured Kelvar into the grain. By the time morning intake started and the serving line filled with the shuffling, patient press of bodies, the crate was empty. The child had climbed out and was sitting in the narrow space between the back wall and the industrial cooler, knees drawn up, the empty cup held against her chest with both hands. Nara served 60 meals. She did not look at the child. She did not speak to the child. She worked the line, spooned grain mash, answered questions about ration adjustments, and quietly set aside 1 extra serving in a bowl behind the counter. When the line cleared, she placed the bowl on the floor near the cooler and walked outside to check the water purification unit. When she came back, the bowl was empty. The day continued. Nara had 7 tasks that could not wait: manifesting the new supply shipment, updating the medical unit's intake log, running the afternoon water purification cycle, repairing a leak in the kitchen's roof panel, arguing with the Dren camp administrator about sanitation standards for the eastern latrine block, preparing the evening meal, and filing the weekly report that Central Relief Command required and never read. She did all 7. The child stayed behind the cooler. Nara left water within reach. At the evening meal, she set aside another serving. By nightfall, the child was asleep, curled on the floor behind the cooler, her head resting on a folded strip of insulation fabric that Nara had placed there without comment, the empty bowl beside her, the cup still held in one hand. Nara locked the kitchen from the outside, not to keep the child in, but to keep everyone else out. She slept on the bench outside her quarters, 3 meters from the kitchen door, where she could hear if anything happened. Nothing happened. The camp settled. The generator hummed. Somewhere in the eastern block, a Dren infant cried briefly and stopped. The stars over Saral were thick and cold and indifferent, the way stars always were in places where people had been left behind. In the morning, Nara unlocked the kitchen and found the child sitting upright behind the cooler, watching the door. Not hiding, watching. "Good morning," Nara said. The child said nothing, but she did not press herself flat. She did not freeze. She sat and watched, and her ears, those long, pointed ears, tilted forward, just slightly, the way a signal dish turns toward a source it has not yet identified but is choosing to track. Nara made the morning mash. She set aside a bowl. She left it near the cooler. She went to the serving line. This became the pattern. 3 days, 4. The child ate what was left. She drank the water. She stayed behind the cooler during meals, silent and still, invisible to the line of refugees who shuffled past the counter for their portions. At night she slept on the insulation fabric. In the morning she was awake before Nara, watching the door. On the 3rd evening, Nara noticed something. The cup, the same cup she had given the child on the first day, had been placed on the counter. Not on the floor, not beside the cooler, but on the counter, where the clean cups went after washing. It had been rinsed. The child had washed her own cup and put it back. Nara picked it up, filled it, and set it down again near the cooler without comment. On the 5th day, Nara was cutting Kelvar leaf at the prep counter when she felt something brush her leg. She looked down. The child was standing beside her, close enough to touch but not touching, looking at the cutting board with the focused attention of someone studying a process. Nara's hands did not stop moving. She kept cutting, kept the blade rhythm steady, kept her voice the same flat, unhurried tone she used for everything. "Kelvar leaf," she said. "I put it in the grain." It has nutrients the supply paste doesn't carry. The child watched the knife. Her silver eyes tracked each cut. Nara set down the knife. She picked up a small leaf, tore it in half, and held one piece out, not toward the child, not pushed forward, just held in an open palm at the child's height. The child looked at the leaf. She looked at Nara's hand, broad, dark-skinned, the knuckles scarred from years of kitchen work and supply crate edges. She reached out and took the leaf. She ate it slowly. Her face did something complicated, not a smile, not quite a grimace, but a rearrangement of features that suggested the taste was unfamiliar, and she was deciding whether it was acceptable. She held out her hand. She wanted more. Nara gave her more. On the 6th day, Pren Goss arrived. Goss was the regional intake officer for the Consolidated Species Welfare Authority, the bureaucratic apparatus that administered refugee camps across the contested zone. He visited Sarol once a month, reviewed the population manifest, filed compliance reports, and left on the same shuttle he arrived on. He was Dren, tall, green-skinned, with the meticulous detachment of someone who had learned to process suffering as data. He found the child, because the child was no longer hiding behind the cooler. She was sitting on an overturned crate beside the prep counter, sorting Kelvar leaves by size, while Nara prepared the midday meal. She had been doing this for 2 days, a task Nara had invented when she noticed the child watching the prep work with an intensity that suggested she wanted to participate but did not know how to ask. The sorting was unnecessary. The Kelvar went into the grain regardless of size, but the child worked at it with the same careful precision she brought to eating, deliberately, thoroughly, as if the task contained something she needed. Nara, Goss stood in the kitchen doorway, his datapad in hand, his expression the particular blend of concern and irritation that administrators wore when they discovered unauthorized variables. "What is this?" "She came in a grain crate," Nara said, not stopping her work. "5 days ago. Species: Cathari juvenile. No identification, no intake record, no guardianship papers." "You didn't report her." "I'm reporting her now, to you in person." Goss looked at the child. The child looked at the Kelvar leaves. Her ears had gone flat. "She needs to be registered," Goss said. "Processed through intake. Medical screening, species verification, displacement history if she can provide one. And she needs to be placed. We have agreements with 3 Cathari settlement programs." "She can't provide a displacement history," Nara said. "She hasn't spoken." "In 5 days. She eats, she sorts leaves, she sleeps behind the cooler, she doesn't talk." "The settlement programs are 6 systems away. The nearest one has a 14-month wait list and a 60% dropout rate because the housing is built for adult Cathari, not children. I've read the reports, Goss." "You've read the reports." "I read everything that involves a child in my care." Goss was quiet for a moment. He looked at the child again. She had resumed sorting, her small gray hands moving with steady care, her silver eyes fixed on the task as if Goss did not exist. The ears stayed flat. "Nara," he said, and his voice held something that was not unkindness but was close to exhaustion. "You're an aid worker, not a foster parent, not a guardianship candidate. You run a kitchen in a camp that's operating at 400% capacity with a staff of 1. You can't just keep her. Keep her." "I'm not keeping her, she's here, there's a difference." Goss filed the intake report remotely. He assigned the child a case number KTHS412UNR, the 412th displaced person registered at Sarol, species Cathari, status unaccompanied minor. He noted in the file that the child was nonverbal, that she had arrived via unauthorized transport in a supply crate, and that the camp coordinator had assumed temporary care. He flagged the case for placement review. "The review process takes 60 days minimum," he told Nara as he left. "Keep her fed. Keep her out of the registered population until her medical clearance comes through. And for the record, I'm noting that this arrangement is provisional and irregular." "Noted," Nara said. "And Nara." "Yes." "You're already feeding 60 people on rations meant for 40. Where is the food for the 61st coming from?" "Mine," Nara said. Goss looked at her for a long time. Then he turned and walked to the shuttle without another word. That evening, after the serving line cleared, Nara sat on the kitchen floor with her back against the prep counter. The child was beside her, 3 feet away, eating grain mash from a bowl held in both hands. The generator hummed outside. The evening wind carried the sound of someone singing in the Eastern Bloc, a dren lullaby, low and repetitive, the kind of song that was more rhythm than melody. "My name is Nara," Nara said. She had said this before. She said it every day, the same way she said Kelvar leaf and water and good morning, not as a demand for response, but as a fact placed in the air for whenever the child was ready to pick it up. The child ate. She did not look up. "You don't have to tell me yours," Nara said. "You don't have to tell me anything, but if you want to, I'm here." Silence, grain mash, the lullaby fading. The child set down the bowl. She looked at the floor. She looked at Nara's hands, which were resting on her knees open, still, the same hands that cut Kelvar and portioned grain and carried the crate and never reached without warning. "Selly," the child said. One word barely there, a sound like a leaf landing on water. "Selly," Nara repeated, keeping her voice exactly the same temperature it always was. "That's a good name." The child Selly picked up the bowl and ate the rest of her grain mash, and she did not say anything else, and Nara did not ask her to. The days turned into weeks. Selly's world expanded in small increments, measured in distances from the cooler. By the second week, she stood at the prep counter while Nara worked. By the third, she carried bowls from the washing basin to the drying rack, a task she performed with a seriousness that suggested she understood it mattered, that each bowl cleaned was a bowl that could feed someone, and that feeding someone was important in a way that did not need to be explained. She did not speak often. When she did, her words were short and functional. Water, done, more, hot. She absorbed language the way she absorbed everything, by watching, by proximity, by the slow accumulation of trust that could not be rushed and could not be faked. On the 15th day, the Dren camp administrator, a thin, officious male named Vesk Toril, came to the kitchen to inform Nara that her ration allocation was being reduced. Budget adjustments. Central Relief Command had reclassified Camp Saral's population estimate downward based on outdated census data, and the reduction was effective immediately. "You're cutting rations for a camp that's already starving," Nara said. She was standing at the serving counter, her hands braced on the edge, and her knuckles were white. "The population figures are wrong. I've filed 3 corrections. The actual count is over 500 with the unregistered. You know that. The allocation reflects the official count." "The official count is going to kill people, Toril." He left without changing the allocation. Nara stood at the counter for a long time after he was gone. Then she reduced her own meal portion by half and redistributed the difference across the serving lines next 3 days. Selly noticed. She noticed because she had spent months in crates and corridors learning to read the meaning of every shift in a room's temperature, and the temperature of the kitchen had changed. Nara was moving faster, cutting portions more carefully, checking the grain stores twice instead of once. Her hands, which were always steady, had developed a tightness at the knuckles that Selly recognized, because it was the tightness that came from holding too many things at once. That evening, Selly did not eat her full portion. She ate half, then pushed the bowl across the floor toward Nara. "Not hungry," she said. Nara looked at the half-full bowl. She looked at the child, who was looking at the floor with the deliberate casualness of someone who was lying, and knew she was lying, and was doing it anyway because the lie served someone other than herself. "Eat your food, Sally," Nara said. "You eat it." "I've eaten." "You ate grain water," I watched. Nara was quiet for a long moment. The generator hummed. The camp settled. "We both eat," Nara said. "That's the rule. I feed you, you feed yourself, we both eat. Nobody skips." "You skipped." "Then I won't skip again." Sally pushed the bowl back to the center of the space between them. Nara reached for it. She ate. The grain mash was cold and gritty, and it was the best meal she had eaten in 3 days. On the 17th day, the camp's water purification unit failed. The failure was mechanical, a corroded filter housing that Nara had flagged in her last 3 weekly reports, each time receiving the same response from Central Relief Command. Replacement parts on order, timeline pending. The filter cracked at 400, flooding the purification bay with untreated groundwater that smelled of sulfur and carried bacterial loads that Kass, the camp's medical officer, described as impressively hostile. 400 people needed clean water. The backup supply was a 3-day reserve stored in sealed drums behind the medical unit. 3 days until the next shuttle. 3 days of rationed water for a camp already rationing everything else. Nara worked the problem the way she worked every problem. Methodically, without panic, with the grinding persistence of someone who had learned that systems fail, and that the people inside those systems still need to eat and drink and survive until someone fixes what broke. She jury-rigged a filtration bypass using medical-grade membrane from Kass's surgical supply, a solution that was technically against 17 separate health protocols, and that saved the camp's water supply for 48 hours while she stripped the purification unit to its housing and rebuilt the filter assembly from salvaged components, shuttle packing material, and a mineral screen she fabricated from wire mesh and compressed sand. Sally helped. Not because Nara asked. Because the child appeared at her elbow at 600 with a bucket in one hand and a look on her face that was not quite determination and not quite defiance, but lived somewhere between the two. The look of a person who has decided that what is happening is her concern, and that being small does not disqualify her from acting. She carried buckets. She held tools. She ran clean rags from the medical unit to the purification bay and back, her gray legs pumping over the hard-packed dirt of the camp's central path, her silver hair streaming behind her. The Dren refugees watched her run, this small, gray, silent child they had never seen before, sprinting between buildings in the early light like a creature with somewhere urgent to be. A Dren elder named Kessa, Vorn, a woman who had been at Sarol since its founding, and who had seen every shortage and crisis and institutional failure the camp had weathered, stopped Nara outside the medical unit. "The gray child," Kessa said, "yours. She came in a grain crate. She runs like she belongs here. She does belong here." Kessa looked at Nara with the steady assessment of someone who had survived enough to know the difference between charity and commitment. Then she nodded once and went to the water distribution point without another word. By the time the bypass was running, Sally's arms were shaking from the weight of the buckets, and her gray skin was streaked with the yellow dust that covered everything in Camp Sarol during the dry season. She stood beside Nara at the purification unit and watched the first clean water flow through the rebuilt filter. "Clean," Sally said. "Clean," Nara confirmed. Sally nodded. She looked at the water. She looked at the camp, at the line already forming at the distribution point, at the Dren workers filling containers. "How many people?" she asked. 413 now, Nara said, "including you." "Including me," Sally repeated. She said it quietly, but something in the way she said it, some shift in weight, some settling of her small frame, suggested that she was not repeating the number. She was accepting the fact of being counted. On the 22nd day, the first threat walked through the gate. A Casa trader at the camp's southern entrance was selling water purification tablets at twice the relief rate, exploiting the fear that the filter repair was temporary. Nara confronted him. The confrontation escalated. The trader's partner, a wide-shouldered Casa male with a scar across his jaw, stepped forward and put his hand on Nara's shoulder, his grip tightening past casual into a register that was intended to communicate something specific about power and willingness to use it. Nara removed his hand. She did it with a speed and a grip strength that surprised both Casa and left the partner flexing his fingers where her thumb had pressed into the nerve cluster at his wrist. She told them both that the camp's water supply was not a market commodity, and that if she found them selling again, she would revoke their gate access and report them to the regional authority. The trader left. His partner lingered at the gate, watching Nara with the flat appraisal of someone measuring a target and revising the cost of retaliation. Sally had been standing at the kitchen door. She had seen everything: the hand on Nara's shoulder, the removal, the look. When Nara came back, the child was behind the cooler again, flat against the wall, ears pressed down, her breathing the shallow, rapid pull that Nara recognized from the first day. Nara did not go to her. She made the afternoon meal. She set aside a bowl. She left it near the cooler. 40 minutes passed before Sally crept out, took the bowl and ate. That evening, Nara sat on the kitchen floor in her usual spot. "The man at the gate won't come back," she said. "I handled it." Sally was not looking at her. She was looking at her own hands, turning them over, studying the flat gray skin as if checking for damage she could not see. "Nobody is going to hurt you here," Nara said. "Not while I'm in this kitchen." Sally's ears shifted, not up, not quite forward, but away from the skull, loosening incrementally, the way a fist unclenches one finger at a time. "Kitchen," Sally said. "Yes. Safe. Safe." The child nodded. She pulled the insulation fabric around her shoulders and closed her eyes, and for the first time since the water crisis, her breathing slowed to something that looked like rest rather than vigilance. On the 29th day, the camp's only medical officer, a veli named Kas, who had been serving Sarol for 3 years without relief, asked to examine the child. Nara brought Sally to the medical unit. She held the child's hand the entire time, not because Sally asked, but because when Nara had started walking toward the medical unit, Sally had reached up and taken it, and Nara had closed her fingers around the child's without breaking stride. Kas was gentle and efficient. The examination took 15 minutes. The results confirmed what Nara already suspected. The child was underweight, her bioluminescence at 11% of species baseline, and she carried the markers of prolonged cortisol elevation consistent with extended displacement and sustained threat avoidance. "She's been alone for a long time," Kas said, reading the results at a volume Sally could not hear. "Months, at minimum. The cortisol pattern suggests she spent most of that time in a state of active flight. Wherever she was before the crate, she was running from something." "Or someone," Nara said. "Or someone." The Cathari were systematically displaced during the consolidation. The Ven Protectorate classified their orphans as displaced assets, a legal category that allows for state-mandated repatriation to integration facilities. Those facilities. "I know about the facilities." "Then you know why she was in a grain crate." Nara looked through the medical unit's window at the supply yard. Sally was sitting on the bench outside, holding the small cutting knife Nara had given her, turning it slowly in her hands the way she turned everything, examining it, understanding it, deciding whether it was safe to believe in. 2 Dren children from the Eastern Bloc were watching her from across the path. They had been watching for several minutes. Sally had not acknowledged them, but she had not moved away either. She was sitting in the open, visible, with a knife she trusted in her hands, and she was letting herself be seen. A month ago that would have been impossible. Kas pulled up one more scan result. The cortisol graph showed a declining curve over the past 3 weeks, still elevated, still carrying the signature of sustained distress, but trending downward for the first time in what the scanner estimated was months. "Whatever you're doing," Koss said, "keep doing it." On the 33rd day, the someone arrived. They came in a skiff, a fast, armored transport that was not a refugee vessel and not a relief ship. It set down outside the camp perimeter at midday, kicking up a plume of yellow dust that hung in the still air like a curtain being drawn. 3 figures disembarked. 2 soldiers in dark tactical armor bearing the crest of the Ven Protectorate, and a civilian in formal robes who carried a scanning device and walked with the unhurried precision of someone accustomed to having their time respected. The civilian's name was Torin Hall. He was a recovery agent for the Protectorate's Office of Displaced Assets, and the scanning device he carried was calibrated to detect Cathari bioluminescent signatures across a range of 2 kilometers. He found Nara in the kitchen. "Coordinator Osai," he said. His voice was polished, practiced, the voice of someone who had delivered this speech so many times it had lost all texture. "The Ven Protectorate has issued a recovery order for a Cathari juvenile, designation VKR9, who is believed to be present in this facility. The child is classified as a displaced asset under Protectorate Authority Code 714 and is subject to immediate repatriation." Nara's hand stopped moving over the grain. She set down her spoon. "A displaced asset," she said. "Under the consolidation settlement terms, all Cathari orphans of the Ven Reach conflict are classified as wards of the Ven Protectorate. Their repatriation to approved processing facilities is mandated by treaty." Processing facilities. Integration centers. The child will be assessed, educated, and placed with an approved Protectorate household. Behind the counter, behind the cooler, Selly had gone completely still. Nara could feel it, the silence that was not empty but dense, the silence of a small creature who had heard the sound of the thing she had been running from and understood that it had found her. "I've read about your integration centers," Nara said, "the ones on Venkalis and Venora. Then you know they meet all interspecies welfare standards. I know 3 independent audits found evidence of cultural erasure programs. I know Cathari children placed in Protectorate households show bioluminescence rates below 5% within 6 months. I know the word integration is carrying weight it shouldn't have to carry." Torin Hall's expression did not change. His scanning device beeped softly in the direction of the cooler. "Coordinator Osai. The recovery order is legally binding under the Consolidation Treaty, to which your Central Relief Command is a signatory. Noncompliance constitutes an obstruction of interspecies governance and is subject to." "I know what it's subject to." "Then I trust you'll cooperate." Nara looked at the 2 soldiers standing behind Hall. They were armed. Their weapons were holstered, but the holster straps were unfastened, standard recovery protocol. They had done this before. They had walked into refugee camps and aid stations across the contested zone and taken children who had no one to stand between them and a treaty written by governments that had never asked those children what they wanted. "Give me 1 hour, Nara said. "Coordinator." 1 hour. I need to get her things." Hall studied her. "What things does a child in a grain crate have?" "More than she arrived with." He granted the hour. He retreated to the skiff. The soldiers stayed at the kitchen door. Nara went behind the counter. She crouched, lowering herself until she was at Selly's eye level, the same way she had done on the first day, the same way she had done every day since. Getting small, getting close, becoming a shape that did not loom. Selly was pressed against the wall behind the cooler. Her gray skin was flat and dull. Her silver eyes were wide, the pupils contracted to points. Her hands were clenched around the insulation fabric, knuckles pale beneath the skin. "I heard them," Selly whispered, the longest sentence she had spoken. I know. They take us. I heard, before the crate. They take Cathari children and they make the light go away. They make you forget the forest language. They put you in rooms that are white and bright and wrong, and they teach you to be quiet until you don't remember how to be loud. Nara's chest tightened. She kept her face steady. That's not going to happen to you, she said. They have a treaty. I know about the treaty. You can't stop a treaty. Nara looked at this child, this gray-skinned, silver-eyed, silent child who had arrived in a grain crate with nothing but fear, and who had spent 5 weeks learning that a kitchen could be safe, that Kelvar tasted strange but mattered, that some hands cut food instead of people, that the word safe existed and could be true. Selly, Nara said, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to do it. That's how I work. You've watched me long enough to know that. The child looked at her. The fear was enormous, filling the space behind those silver eyes like water filling a hold, but she did not look away. I'm going to make some calls, Nara said, and I'm going to need you to stay right here behind this cooler and sort Kelvar leaves until I come back. Can you do that? Selly looked at the pile of unsorted Kelvar on the counter above her. She looked at Nara. Sort by size, she asked. By size, just like always. The child reached up, pulled a handful of leaves from the counter and began sorting. Nara stood and walked out of the kitchen, past the 2 soldiers, across the supply yard to the communications shack. She sat at the terminal and called Pren Goss. The Protectorate has a recovery team in the camp, she said. 3 of them. They're here for the child. Nara, the Consolidation Treaty, has an Article 12 exception, subsection 4. I've been reading it for 3 weeks, Goss, ever since I found out she was Cathari and I understood who would come looking. Silence on the line. Article 12, subsection 4 provides that a displaced minor may not be repatriated to a signatory authority if the camp coordinator or designated welfare officer certifies that repatriation would constitute a demonstrable threat to the minor's physical or psychological well-being, and if an alternative placement exists within the camp's operational jurisdiction. An alternative placement. Me. Nara, you're an aid worker. You live in a prefabricated shelter in a camp that doesn't have running water half the time. You're not qualified. No, I'm the person she trusts. There's a Cathari welfare study from the University of Then showing that bioluminescence recovery in displaced Cathari juveniles correlates directly with the presence of a consistent primary attachment figure, not with the quality of the physical facility. The study tracked 400 children over 6 years. The ones who recovered were the ones who had someone, not somewhere, someone. Nara. I am her someone, Goss. She told me her name. Do you understand what that means for a Cathari child who has been running for months? She sorted Kelvar leaves for 2 weeks before she said a single word, and the first word she chose was her own name, and she gave it to me. That is not a clinical data point. That is a child deciding to exist in front of another person. Goss was quiet for a long time. The comms link hissed with static. I'll invoke Article 12, he said. It buys you 30 days. The Protectorate will challenge it. You'll need to file a formal welfare certification and present it to a review panel. I know. And Nara, the panel is 3 Dren administrators and a Protectorate observer. They're not going to be sympathetic to a human aid worker who wants to keep a Cathari child in a camp kitchen. Then I'll make them sympathetic. How? I'll bring her. The 30 days were a siege. Torin Hall did not leave the camp. He established a temporary office in the administration building and filed daily status inquiries with Central Relief Command, each one noting Nara's noncompliance and requesting expedited review. The 2 soldiers rotated shifts at the camp perimeter, their presence a steady, visible reminder that the Protectorate's patients had dimensions. On the 5th day of the siege, Hall raised the stakes. He filed a formal complaint with Central Relief Command alleging that Nara's continued employment constituted a conflict of interest and requesting her immediate removal from the camp coordinator position. The complaint arrived on Nara's terminal at 600, sandwiched between a request for updated latrine sanitation figures and a notification that the next supply shuttle was delayed by 3 days. She read it while making the morning mash. Sally watched her face. "Bad?" Sally asked. "Complicated," Nara said. "Is it about me?" Nara set down the spoon. She looked at the child, who was looking at her with the focused steadiness that was her version of bracing for impact. "It's about someone trying to make me choose between my job and doing the right thing," Nara said. "They think those are different things." "Are they?" "Not in my kitchen." She filed her response to the complaint during the afternoon water purification cycle, typing with one hand while monitoring the filter pressure with the other. The response cited 11 regulations, 4 welfare precedents, and her own performance record: 14 months without a single missed meal service, 0 foodborne illness incidents, and the lowest mortality rate of any camp in the contested zone. She concluded with a single line: "I will not abandon this post, and I will not abandon this child, and any authority that requires me to choose between the two has misunderstood the function of both." The complaint was withdrawn 6 days later. Nobody told her why. Nara worked. She cooked 60 meals a day, repaired the water purification unit a second time when the bypass membrane failed, argued with suppliers, and at every spare moment she built her case. She assembled medical records from CAS. She cataloged the evidence of Sally's progress: the weight gain, the vocabulary growth, the slow incremental rise of bioluminescence that CAS tracked weekly. She contacted 3 independent Cathari welfare organizations and requested written testimony. The soldiers at the perimeter made Sally cautious again. She spent more time behind the cooler during the first week after Hall's arrival, and her vocabulary contracted: fewer words, shorter sentences, the linguistic equivalent of drawing back into a shell. Nara watched it happen and did not push. She left bowls. She sorted Kelvar. She kept the rhythm of the kitchen steady and predictable, because predictability was the architecture of safety, and safety was the only material she had to build with. By the second week, Sally emerged again. She returned to the prep counter. She carried bowls. And she did something new. She began arranging things. The Kelvar leaves sorted by size, the bowls stacked by depth, the utensils organized by function. She was ordering the kitchen the way a person orders a room they intend to stay in, with purpose, with investment, with the quiet declaration that this space was hers. On the 38th day, Hall made his second move. He arrived at the kitchen unannounced, without the soldiers, carrying a datapad loaded with a new weapon, a formal petition to reclassify Camp Saral's kitchen as a non-residential structure unsuitable for minor habitation. The petition cited 12 building codes, 8 ventilation standards, and a fire safety regulation that the kitchen had technically violated since the day the camp was built. "If the kitchen is reclassified," he told Nara, standing in the doorway with his datapad angled so she could read the header, "the child cannot sleep here, cannot be housed here. Your Article 12 placement becomes void because the alternative placement ceases to meet minimum habitation standards." Nara was portioning grain. Her hands did not stop. "You're filing a building code complaint against a refugee camp kitchen that feeds 400 people, she said. "In a camp where the latrines are open trenches and the medical unit doesn't have a sealed floor. The codes are the codes. The codes are a tool, and you're using them as a lever. The distinction matters." Coordinator Osai: "I will have the ventilation upgraded, the fire exits marked, and a habitation partition installed by the time your petition reaches the review queue. I know the timeline on building code reviews in this jurisdiction. It's 45 days. You know what else takes 45 days? The appeal window. You're trying to outrun me, Hall, and you're running on a track I know better than you do. Hall looked past her at the kitchen interior. Sally was at the prep counter, arranging bowls. She had stopped moving when Hall appeared in the doorway, but she had not retreated behind the cooler. She stood at her station, her small hands resting on a stack of clean bowls, and she watched the man in the doorway with an expression that was no longer the frozen stillness of the grain crate. It was something harder, something that had edges. Hall noticed. He looked at the child's face and saw something he had not seen in his previous visits: resistance. Not the panicked flight of a displaced minor, the deliberate, grounded refusal of a person who had found her ground and was standing on it. He left without filing the petition. Nara finished portioning the grain. She served the midday meal. When the line cleared, she walked to the supply yard, found the Dren elder Kessa Vorn, and asked if anyone in the camp had construction experience. By evening, 3 Dren refugees were building a habitation partition in the kitchen from salvaged shelter panels and material from a decommissioned storage unit. Sally carried nails. The partition went up in 2 days. It was ugly and functional, and it created a sleeping area that met every ventilation and fire code that Hall could have cited. Nara hung a curtain across the partition, opening a piece of fabric donated by a Veli weaver in the northern block, who had heard about the gray child in the kitchen, and who sent the fabric with a note that read, in careful Veli script, "For the small one. A door she can open herself." Sally hung the curtain. She ran her fingers along its edge. She opened it. She closed it. She opened it again. "My door," she said. "Your door," Nara confirmed. That night Sally slept behind the curtain for the first time. Nara lay in her own bunk on the other side of the partition, listening to the child's breathing through the fabric. It was steady, even, the breath of a person sleeping in a place they had chosen, behind a door they could open themselves. At some point in the small hours, Nara heard the curtain move. She felt a small body climb onto the end of her bunk and curl there, not touching her, not asking for anything, just close. Close enough to hear another person breathing, close enough to know she was not alone. Nara did not move. She lay still and she breathed and she let the child sleep at the end of her bunk. And she did not cry, because there was morning prep to think about and water to purify and a case to build. But her throat ached with something she did not have a regulation for. On the 41st day, Sally spoke a full paragraph. Nara was sitting on the kitchen floor after the evening meal, too tired to stand, her back against the counter, her eyes closed. She felt Sally sit beside her closer than usual, close enough that their arms almost touched. In the forest, Sally said, the trees had light. Nara opened her eyes. The child was not looking at her. She was looking at her own hands, turning them over, studying the dull gray skin. The light came from the bark and from us. We would climb up and the light from the trees and the light from our skin would mix, and you couldn't tell where the forest ended and the person began. My mother said that was the point, that we were not separate from the forest, that the light was the same light. She paused. Her voice was small and rough, like a mechanism being used for the first time in a long time. "They burned the forest," she said. "In the consolidation, they said it was strategic resource denial. They burned it and the light went away, from the trees first and then from us. My mother's light went away before she did. I remember that. The light left and then she left and then there was just the dark and the running and the crates." Nara did not move. She did not reach for the child. She sat and she listened, and she let the words come at their own pace, the way she let everything come without pressure, without expectation. "You have light in your kitchen," Sally said. "Not tree light, but it comes from a place that is warm and it goes into food that goes into people and it keeps going. I can feel it." She looked at Nara. Her silver eyes held something that was not quite hope and not quite trust, but was in the territory where those two things met. "I don't want my light to go away," she said. It won't, Nara said. On the 52nd day, the review panel convened. It was held in the camp's administration building, a prefab structure with a single table, 5 chairs, and a ventilation system that rattled every 30 seconds. 3 Dren administrators sat on one side. Torin Hall sat on the other, his scanning device on the table in front of him. Pren Goss sat at the end. Nara entered with Selly. The child walked beside her, not holding her hand. Nara had offered, and Selly had shaken her head, a gesture that meant not "I don't want to, but I need to do this standing up." She wore a simple tunic that a Dren refugee had donated and that Nara had taken in at the seams with imperfect stitching. Nara presented her case. She spoke for 12 minutes. She cited the medical data, the bioluminescence trajectory, the welfare study, the independent testimony. Then she said what the data could not say. This child arrived in my kitchen in a grain crate, hiding. She was gray. She was silent. Her skin had stopped producing the bioluminescence that her species uses to communicate safety and belonging. In the 7 weeks since, she has started to eat. She has started to speak. She has started to work, not because I made her, but because I let her, because I gave her a task that was real and told her it mattered, and she believed me. Her bioluminescence is at 23%. It was at 11. That number represents something the treaty doesn't have a clause for. It represents a child who is deciding, one day at a time, to exist in front of another person. Not because the facility is adequate, not because the rations meet minimum standards, but because someone is there, consistently, without conditions. She paused. The Protectorate's integration centers will house her. They will feed her. They will teach her a language and assign her a household and file reports that say she is compliant and adjusted. And her light will go out, not because anyone is cruel, because no one is hers, because institutions do not kneel down to a child's height. They do not leave a bowl of food beside a cooler and walk away. They do not sort Kelvar leaves while a small person watches and decides, at her own pace, whether the world is worth participating in. Torin Hall spoke. He cited the treaty, the legal framework, the placement record, the compliance statistics. He was thorough and correct, and his arguments had the structural integrity of something built by people who understood leverage and did not understand children. The senior administrator looked at the child. "Do you understand what is happening here?" she asked. Selly looked at the administrator. Her ears were upright and angled forward, receiving. "Yes," she said. "Do you want to go with the Protectorate representative?" Selly looked at Torin Hall. She looked at the soldiers visible through the window. She looked at the scanning device on the table. "No," she said. "Can you tell us why?" The child was quiet for a moment. She looked at Nara, not for instruction, not for permission, but the way you look at a fixed point when you need to steady yourself. "She feeds people," Selly said, "every day. She wakes up and she makes food and she gives it away and she does it again. She doesn't have enough, she never has enough, but she does it anyway, every bowl, every day, every person. And she gave me a bowl even though I was hiding. She gave me water even though she didn't know what I was. She didn't ask me to explain myself or prove myself or perform anything. She just gave me food and let me be quiet." Her voice steadied. That is what the light needs. Not a facility, not a program, someone who gives you a bowl and doesn't ask for it back. The room was silent. The ventilation system rattled. Torin Hall's scanning device sat on the table, its screen dark. The senior administrator looked at her colleagues. She looked at Nara. She looked at the child. "Article 12, subsection 4, the administrator said. "The welfare certification is accepted. The child remains in the coordinator's care pending permanent placement review." "The Protectorate will appeal," Hall said. "The Protectorate is welcome to appeal. The child stays." Hall collected his scanning device. He stood. "You understand this isn't permanent," he said to Nara. "The appeal process." "Takes 18 months, Nara said. I've read the timeline. And if we prevail, then you'll have to come back to this kitchen and take her from me yourself. And you'll do it in front of the 400 people I feed every day, who will be watching and who will remember. Hall left, the soldiers followed. Goss remained. He stood in the doorway of the administration building and watched the skiff lift off and bank east, its engine noise fading into the distance. Then he turned to Nara. "You know the appeal will come," he said. "I know. 18 months is a long time to run a camp kitchen and raise a child and fight a government. I've been doing all three for the past 2 months. The next 18 will have better infrastructure." Goss looked at her. Then he looked at Selly, who was standing beside Nara with her hand in the woman's hand and her ears up, and her skin carrying the faintest shimmer of light that had not been there when Goss had first walked into the kitchen, and found a gray child sitting on a crate. "I'll assign a caseworker to support the permanent placement filing," he said. "And I'll flag your ration allocation for correction, the actual population count." "Thank you, Goss." "Don't thank me. I'm doing my job. You're the one doing the impossible thing." He walked to the shuttle. Nara watched him go. The evening light fell across Camp Sarah like something gentle laid over something worn, and the wind carried the sound of the generator, and the voices of 400 people settling into the routines that kept them alive, routines that a single human woman maintained with her hands and her stubbornness, and her refusal to accept that not enough was a permanent condition. Nara walked back to the kitchen with Selly beside her. The child's hand found hers, not reaching, not grasping, but settling into it the way a component settles into a housing it was designed for. In the kitchen, Nara began the evening meal. Selly climbed onto her crate beside the prep counter and picked up the kelvar leaves. "Nara," she said. "Yes. My light is doing something." Nara looked at the child's hands. The gray skin was shifting slowly, like a landscape emerging from fog. A faint luminescence was rising from beneath the surface, soft and diffuse, not the steady glow of a healthy Cathari, but the first tentative pulse of something that had been dark for a very long time deciding to come back. Nara kept her face steady. She kept her hands moving. She cut kelvar and portioned grain and did not make a single moment of it a ceremony, because ceremonies demanded performance, and what was happening in the child's skin was not a performance. It was a decision, the biological expression of a truth that had no name in any treaty, that a child's body knows when it is safe, and the knowing makes light. "It's doing the right thing," Nara said. Selly sorted kelvar leaves. Her hands glowed faintly as she worked, casting soft gray-white light across the cutting board, illuminating the grain and the knife and the bowl that would carry food to someone who needed it. The next morning, Selly stood at the serving line for the first time. She was small enough that she had to stand on a crate to reach the counter. She held the ladle with both hands and she spooned grain mash into bowls one at a time, carefully, precisely, the way she did everything Nara had shown her, not because she had been told to, but because she had watched and decided that this was work worth doing. The refugees came through the line. Most of them had never seen the child before. They saw a small gray-skinned girl with silver eyes and pointed ears, standing on a crate serving food with a seriousness that made several of them pause. A Dren woman at the front of the line looked at the child and then at Nara. "Yours?" she asked. Nara was behind the counter, portioning the kelvar supplement, her hands moving in the same steady rhythm they always moved in. "Mine," she said. Selly spooned grain mash into the woman's bowl. The ladle was heavy for her. She lifted it with both hands, her arms steady, her face focused. A faint glow pulsed beneath her gray skin, not bright, not steady, but present, visible, a frequency finding its channel. The woman took her bowl. She looked at the child. "Thank you," she said. Selly nodded. She dipped the ladle. She served the next person, and the next, and the next, and the light in her skin grew stronger with each bowl, with each hand that reached forward and received, with each small transaction of need met and care given that made up the ordinary, unrecorded, unlegislated work of keeping people alive. Nara watched her from the corner of her eye and did not comment and did not stop working, because there was evening prep to start and water to purify, and a report to file that nobody would read, and because the child at the serving line was glowing faintly, steadily, her small body remembering what it meant to be a source of light in a place where light was needed, and there was nothing in the world that required saying about that. The bowls were full, the line was fed, the kitchen was warm, and the light held.